What's going on, guys? Bowman's back in the shock surplus shop to talk more shocks, and today we had a customer come in for a same-day service on his F-150. This truck had a 6-inch BDS kit, and so rather than go through the whole rebuild mumbo-jumbo that we usually do, that'd be a perfect time to talk about the dirty word that is drop bracket lifts and hopefully educate you guys on making a good decision with your suspension setup. Before we talk about the many flaws and the few benefits of a lift system such as this, let's kind of talk about what is a drop bracket lift system and why you gotta drop things with the bracket. So on an independent suspension setup, as you extend the front suspension for more lift, you start to run into issues with either ball joint angle, tie rod angle, CV angle. Things bind, you can only go so high. On most vehicles, you can usually get up to 2.5 inches of lift with just a coilover strut or spacer, and higher than that, you can usually get away to maybe 3.5 with an aftermarket upper control arm. Now, usually at that 4-inch lift mark, you've lifted things so high that everything is out of phase, and therefore, lots of points of geometry need to be corrected. On these drop bracket lift systems, essentially everything below that upper ball joint gets changed out, lowered, so that it restores, at least to some degree, the geometry it had when it was stock. So the first thing that you're probably gonna see here is where the lower control arms mount to the chassis on that cross member, there is a bracket that drops everything down, lowering everything so that the angles are decent. You'll see that when you do a lot of these systems, you end up having to cut your factory cross member on your frame. Yes, you need to do frame modifications, lower your differential down, and ultimately, the combination of these things in a perfect world should get you into decent geometry, although oftentimes we don't find that to be the case. The biggest thing that you see, or the biggest issue you see with these systems that lower everything is a lot of the height you gain from the lift, a lot of the clearance you gain from the lift is lost by the drop bracket. So in this case, this is a 6-inch lift kit with about a 4.5 inch drop bracket. That means your cross member and everything mounted in the middle of the vehicle, essentially the point in your suspension that is the lowest when it compresses, is now 4 inches lower. So effectively, you would have the same clearance as a truck with 2 inches of lift, but now it is 6 inches taller. These kits do make it easier to clear larger tires, but if you're familiar with geometry and you've kind of done your math, effectively, you would need to increase tire size by 8 total inches in diameter to make up that 4-inch loss of ride height. So what does that mean? This truck would have come with a 31 or a 32, probably a 32 from the factory. That would mean it would need a 40-inch tire to have the same clearance as you would have with just a 2-inch lift on the stock tires. One of the reasons why we don't love these systems. Additionally, although they do a lot of things to correct geometry, part of the problem is most of these companies who are making these lift systems aren't really that concerned with performance. They're more trying to get you a truck that looks tall and mean, which means we often see worse geometry than it would have had with just your basic leveling kit. On this truck, we noticed probably about 2 inches of scrub, so the track width changing about 2 inches. There's probably about 1/2 inch of toe in and toe out from ride height, which is definitely worse than a stock F-150. Now, that said, if you're having one of these systems, chances are you're probably not wheeling it hard. But if you are, these are things you need to be concerned about. So now that we've talked about all the things you need to do to correct for the lift in these drop bracket lift systems, let's talk about how the lift is achieved. In most cases, these systems are going to use a spacer over your stock strut or are available with a full-length coilover like this. What you get with a full coilover like you see here isn't actually more travel, and a lot of times it isn't more performance, but it is cleaner packaging. Your ultimate limitation on most of these independent suspension vehicles is not shock length, it is not ride height. It is actually the length of the control arms, axle shafts, and steering, as well as the amount of available articulation at those joints. Whether you go 10 inches in the air or you keep it stock height, the maximum travel limit within that system is still going to be the same. So what we see on these full-length coilovers is that they essentially just build the length of the spacer into the body of the coilover. You're not getting any more travel. In fact, these 4 to 6 inch Fox coilovers actually have about 1/10 of an inch less travel than their 0 to 2 or 2.5 inch body mid-travel coilovers. So in actuality, you're losing travel. What they effectively do is, you'll see this body is pretty long. It's basically the body that they would use for a 12 or 14 inch travel shock. And then they have about 6 or 8 inches of spacers, limiting travel so it does not droop any further. Effectively, you just have a really long shock that gives you the same amount of travel you would have had almost stock. Additionally, because of the limitations put into the suspension by the poor geometry these kits usually have, these companies end up having to put a lot of valving, and since the truck is so tall, they have to go up in spring rate as well when you look at these true coilovers. On an F-150, usually we're looking at a 450 to a 550 pound spring, at least on a stock weight vehicle. These Fox coilovers come with a 650 pound per inch spring, which means what they're doing is using that spring rate, using that stiff valving so the suspension doesn't move a lot and you can't tell that the geometry isn't good. And then they're also offsetting how much lean you're gonna get with such a tall vehicle. So why would you want to spend the money to go to a full-length coilover outside of it looking cooler? Well, the big thing is on most of these systems, a 2.5 inch or larger body coilover is going to have contact issues with things like the upper control arm, your spindle, your tie rod, your axle shafts, if used with the spacer needed to achieve this lift. So if you feel you need the performance of a 2.5 inch or larger body on your drop bracket lift, you probably shouldn't have bought a drop bracket lift, but if you do, then you will end up having to go to a full-length coilover. Now, ultimately, as you're catching on to, we don't think this is the right solution. Now, we can't tell you how to make your rig look. If you like the way this looks, go ahead. But if you're concerned about performance, there's a reason why the companies that make high-performance systems don't really mess with these kits. Now, as far as options available go, we do think BDS does it best. The geometry isn't as good as just a basic leveling kit would be, but it's a lot better than the other systems, and they use really high quality components you can rely on. But let's drop back a little bit and talk about all the reasons why you don't want to run these lifts. So the first thing is, and the biggest thing for us is, you are modifying your frame cross member most of the time in a way that's not easy to go back from. And additionally, many of the times people are trying to do these lift systems to clear larger tires, but ultimately, if the goal is to make it so you don't have to trim the body, trimming the frame instead seems like a fool's errand even to a fool like me. Like we were talking about, although it is easier to clear larger tires, the clearance loss from those drop bracket kits means you got to clear a lot bigger tire. In the particular case of this F-150, which, like we said, would have had 32-inch tires from the factory, you would need a 40-inch tire to make up the clearance you lost compared to just a basic leveling kit. I know firsthand that you can basically massage a 34-inch tire into clearing on a 2 to 3 inch lift on these F-150s. Just got to mess with the crash bar brackets, maybe trim the bumper a little bit. That would mean to get the same clearance with this lift system, you would need 42s. Additionally, we found that the clearance issue, like most F-150s, isn't vertical. It is fore and aft, and this truck with 35s, so only an inch taller, or a half an inch more clearance than they would have been able to clear with a more basic lift, are still rubbing, and you would still need to do the same trimming you would have had to do at a lower lift height. Additionally, if you're doing this for more tires, you're spending money on tires that you're going to burn out faster, because these kits almost always have more bump steer or toe change, more scrub, and more camber and caster change, or camber change most importantly, throughout their travel than a more basic setup would. So those big tires you just spent money on aren't going to last as long as if you kept things more simple. Additionally, although BDS does a really good job of making good components for these kits, a lot of those other companies aren't concerned about serious real off-road driving. It's for looks. So the components aren't as stout, reliable, or well built as you might find from the factory, a more basic kit, or something a little crazier like a long travel kit. And finally, you are not gaining any travel. And in some cases like this, you're actually losing a little bit. So although you're getting more height, you're not getting any more performance out of your suspension. And ultimately, in most cases, you can find a better compromise between bump and droop travel with a more basic leveling coilover as well. Now, once again, we are not here to tell you what you should do with your truck, but I think if you are concerned about performance, you're concerned about something that works well out on the trail, avoiding lift kits like these are one of the best things you can do. Now, we have tons of great coilover, ride height adjustable strut, upper control arm, and other options to give you a good mid-travel leveling or lift kit. So make sure you hop on shocksurplus.com, take a look at all those options, and give us a comment or email if you have any questions about anything you see. Now, if you're interested in the same-day service like we did on this truck, where you can drive your truck in, have your shocks rebuilt, drive out, and have it feeling like the first day you installed your lift kit, make sure to hop on our Shock Service page. Otherwise, if you're not subscribed, hit that button now so you can see the next episode of Shock Talk, and we'll see you out on the trails.